Welcome to our 14th Fireside Chat. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jason Georgiorian. I'm a partner at LGA. We begin these chats as a way to connect people around important issues within our built and natural environments, and how we as designers and community members could work together to create great places that provide positive experiences for all people. So before we jump in, let's discuss some logistics. Everyone is muted today. However, there's a chat feature and also a Q&A button. Please ask questions, make comments along the way. It is my role to monitor the chat and break into our discussion at any time, at the appropriate times, with your questions. My business partner, Craig Galati, will interview our panelists. And finally, we are recording this chat. It'll be available on our website in a week or so. Please check it out. You will also find our past chats, past recordings in case you miss anything. Let us know what you think. You can reach us on our social media outlets, by emails. You can contact us on our website, pick up a phone, knock on our door. It all works for us, and we love to hear from you. I just want to tie it back to our last chat. In our last chat, we discussed the historic Westside Legacy Park and how honoring legacy could help create a sense of place or community. And now, in honor of Preservation Month, tonight's Fireside Chat is entitled Preserving Nevada's Cultural Heritage. This Fireside edition will focus on how preservation and reuse of Nevada's historic places could positively contribute to Nevada's tourism industry, as well as provide educational and economic benefits to our community. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Craig, who will introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. I'm excited to do this one. This is something that's near and dear to my heart, is the preservation of our heritage. So we have three great panelists today. I'm going to give a quick introduction of them, and then we're going to jump right into the questions. Our first panelist is Courtney Mooney. Courtney is an architectural historian and the senior historic preservation planner with Northwind Resource Consulting. You may know her also when she served as the City of Las Vegas Historic Preservation Officer and an urban design coordinator, which she did for many years. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Architecture from UNLV and a Master of Science in Historic Preservation from Columbia University in New York. We were just talking, she does a podcast or a production on YouTube called Whiskey and History. So you should make a note of that, and when it's available, something I'm sure you're going to want to see. So thanks for joining us, Courtney.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're also fortunate to have Brenda Scolari here. Brenda is the director of the Nevada Department of Tourism and Cultural Affairs, and she's a cabinet member for the Sisolak administration. She supervises the Division of Tourism, the Division of Museums and History, Nevada Arts Council, and the Nevada Indian Commission. So what do you do in your spare time? I'm not sure, but part of that, though, she served as the deputy director of this same department, where she led the marketing, public relations, and sales and industry partner teams. She's also the chief marketing officer overseeing Travel Nevada's award-winning creative and media strategy. She's a native Nevadan, 30-year career as a marketing professional. It's included a broad spectrum of creative and digital development in both the public and private sectors. She also serves as a board member of the U.S. Travel Association, Western States Policy Council, and the Reno Tahoe Regional Air Services Corporation, not to mention the Outdoor Recreation Advisory Commission. So Brenda, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me here.
And our panel, last but not least, is Russell Rowe. Russell is a licensed attorney, and his practice focuses primarily on government affairs, administrative law at state, regional, and local levels. If you've ever been to a city council meeting or a planning commission meeting in Southern Nevada, I'm sure you've seen his smiling face in the audience or up at the podium. So Russell is also a graduate of UNLV, but also the San Diego School of Law. And Russ serves as the president of the board of directors for the Nevada Preservation Foundation. So Russ, thanks for being here as well. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Craig.
All right, so we're going to jump into some questions first. And I think maybe this first round will go Courtney, Brenda, then Russ, and then we'll mix it up a bit here so everybody gets plenty of airtime. But please feel free to add on to it and jump in the way you need to. So softball question first time. What is your favorite preservation project? And if you were involved in it, what role did you play and how does it make a difference in our state? Courtney?
So my favorite preservation project, and Russ, I got a shout out to you for your background because my favorite project is the West Side School. I sort of consider that my legacy project from my time at the city. When I first moved to Vegas in the early 90s, I would see the building from the freeway and I would wonder, what it was. The architecture was so unusual for Vegas. So I was really excited when I started working for the city and we were awarded some funding to do some initial stabilization work, which, initially led to the full major rehabilitation. And my role was to work with the community stakeholders and the internal stakeholder team, manage the grant money, make sure that, the city was compliant with the work that we were proposing to do. And I'm sure Russ can speak to this as well, but the school is now a living, breathing piece of history that can be used and experienced by the public. There's leasable space, gallery space, community space, and it really helps bring awareness to the history of the African American and Latino communities in Nevada. And once again, it's a very rare example of its style, especially in Las Vegas. So that is my favorite project that I was had the pleasure of working on.
Am I up?
You're up, Brenda.
Okay. My favorite preservation project is right behind me, which is the Mckeen Car 22. I oversee all 7 state museums, and 3 of those are railway museums. So their place in Nevada history is part of my life every day. And the preservation of a car like this, which was donated to the Carson Museum, it was a 14-year restoration project. This is a fine example of how a rich business person traveled in the state and in the West. And this car is from 1910. But it operated on the V&T, which is also a big part of our history here in the North. So our railway museums in Ely, Carson City, and Boulder City are just part of the fabric of history of those regions. Boulder City Railway, helped build Hoover Dam. In Ely, so central to the Kennecott copper mine, and here in Carson along the V&T, again, a part of the way people lived for a very long time, and of course, the central story of how the entire West was built.
So amazing. The whole rail connections in Nevada are so important. So thank you. Hey, Russ, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. Courtney, you're my new preservation hero. I was not involved at all when you guys were preserving the historic West Side School. I've always loved it when I was first introduced to it. And I'm ashamed to say I didn't even know anything about it until I got involved with Nevada Preservation Foundation. I love the history, but for me, it represents where preservation ties into remembering our history, even some of our history that we don't want to remember, but we need to remember. And I think this is critically important, those kind of projects. So I have a number 2 though. It was hard to choose. The second one, and also because I was a little more involved, was involved with it, is a preservation of the Paradise Palms community in Las Vegas, which is, for those familiar with the Las Vegas Valley, it's Desert Inn, Eastern, Viking, and Spencer. I think it was the first planned community, residential community, and it was built by Erwin Mulaski, some famous architects from Palm Springs, mid-century modern architects, who I don't remember their name. I apologize. I have it written down somewhere. came over and designed that community. And we were involved, NPF was involved in doing the first phase of designating that community as a historic designation overlay in Clark County. It was the first one done by the county. And then we just finished the second one earlier this spring with the assistance of Commissioner Tick Sagerblum and got that done. And then when we held our annual Home and History event just a month ago, one of our walking tours was a couple of homes in Paradise Palms, and it was, yeah, they're some of these homes are just magnificent how residents have maintained them and restored them. And as a kid, I used to ride my bike to get to Valley High School. I rode through that community every day, so there's just a personal connection to it. So it's closest to my heart.
That's so amazing. So many of these places do have a personal connection to us, and I think that's what we love about these types of projects and these types of neighborhoods. Let's jump into the next question, and we'll start with Brenda on this one, and then Russ, and then Courtney. But Nevada's got this amazing cultural heritage, and a lot of people don't know about it. But tell me how you got involved in this and how it fuels your passions.
Well, I came up through the creative side of Travel Nevada, right? So I was very tourism centric until I got this position as director. And the cultural agencies I oversee are now known to me as such an important part of any community's concept of their own quality of life. Really cultural assets are these same as tourism assets. It's the reason people live and work in a community, but it's also the reason travelers want to visit. And we really count cultural assets as one of our premier opportunities to distinguish Nevada amongst Western states as a destination, the other being outdoor recreation. But it really has become a passion, because those are both of those things, outdoor recreation and our cultural assets in the form of structures or artifacts that we could and should preserve, are finite. And so to not only cultivate how they're appreciated in a community, but play a role in how we define the traveler's interaction with them. That's something that Travel Nevada has kind of shifted to during the pandemic. We used to simply promote any tourism business that existed. Really, we weren't very much curating those in terms of our promotion and how we marketed them. And now we're getting involved primarily through our destination development program in the local economy and how tourism is a part of it. And the local culture is a part of that. So it's also interconnected for me now that I think about what Nevada's culture is all day.
Thank you. Russ?
So, as I referenced earlier, I really became involved because of the Nevada Preservation Foundation, and that was due to its founding executive director, Heidi Swank, who recruited me to the board. But it was a really easy sell for her, because I came up as an attorney in land use and zoning. So I get that side of the picture, and that's how I got to know Craig actually in my zoning and land use days working with his firm. And I do a lot of policy work now at the state and local level as well. And all of that, I think from a passion standpoint, is what pours into my interest, going back, to the connection between preservation and our history and how that influences our policies moving forward as a state and a community. But additionally, just from, growing up in Las Vegas and being here since my family moved here in 77, I was 10 years old. And, we've never really preserved anything in this community, and it seemed, and for a while. And so to me, it's a really critical piece of community and developing togetherness as a community, and recognizing our past and what binds us together. And then, from the just the Las Vegas standpoint, when you talk about different communities like a Paradise Palms or Beverly Green or any of these communities that are close to the Strip, there not only is there architectural history there, but there is a rich and colorful old Vegas entertainment history that is just unbelievable. And when you dig into that, and we just can't lose that, right? I mean, that is such a critical part of Vegas history, and is really becoming, and what we're beginning to see just with our little home in history. I shouldn't say little, but COVID shrunk it a bit. We're going to bring it back, but the tourism, the heritage tourism that brings people to Las Vegas, more and more we're seeing there's a very real interest in this, and it's growing, and we see that.
Yeah, so amazing. Those of us that grew up here, have a different appreciation. But you think about the hundreds of thousands of people that moved here from other places that don't know about the history of Las Vegas and the history of Nevada in its context.
Entire state.
Yeah, so it's so amazing, and that's why I think these places are so important for that, to connect to people. Courtney?
So I think I was born a preservationist. My parents, we always talked a lot about, the importance of craftsmanship, and a weird sort of little known fact. I was never allowed to have plastic toys because my dad thought plastic was cheap. So everything was all about wood, and, it had to be old. And growing up a lot in Nevada, I explored a lot in Nevada with my dad. And, he wasn't really respectful of property boundaries. And Dad, if you're listening, I'm sorry to out you, but we explored a lot of historic buildings and mining sites and structures. And we would have long conversations about what the buildings were used for and who might have used them. So it really established in me a sense of connection to the past. And I think, at the risk of becoming dramatic, but when buildings that I had walked past every day on my way to school, or buildings that I had visited as a child, when those were demolished, I would really feel a sense of loss. That if you've never felt it about a building, it's kind of hard to explain. It's like an entire piece of history, all the stories, all the technical information it can provide, memories, everything with it has vanished, and it leaves this hole in time that can never be filled, and no one can ever experience that space or learn from it again. I think that's a huge loss, and we owe it to our history to always try to preserve that. So I told my parents I wanted to work with old buildings. My dad said, you have to get an architecture degree. I was terrified because I didn't know anything about math. I think I failed structures 2 or 3 times, but it was worth every late night and every pot of coffee. And then I went on to get a graduate degree in preservation. And since then, I've just been really fortunate to be gainfully employed in a profession that I love, and I hope to continue.
That's so cool. Well, you were the person that was paying attention in architectural history class when the rest of us weren't.
It's true.
But no, that's great. Thank you. So the next question is they're going to start getting a little harder. But what I want to do, and we'll start with Russ, because I think you work with a lot of clients just like we do, and we hear often preservation's difficult. It costs more money. It's hard to do, and I'm wondering, can you make the case why we should absolutely do it?
Yeah. It's no harder than any other land use application, that's for sure. Not that land use applications are necessarily easy. When you're talking about like a Paradise Palms historic designation, just using that as an example, that process really is pretty straightforward, right? With and the most critical piece, in my opinion, which frankly is true in any land use application, is really good communication with the folks who live there. Right? They're the ones who matter. It's their property, and educating them on what they actually have, and a lot of times they don't know what they're even living in. And when we did that with Paradise Palms and took the time to do that, we had a tremendous response. And a good example with that is the two designations were pre and post COVID. So we did extensive work with the community in the first phase, and the approval was, it didn't even register any type of community engagement at the county commission. The second one we just went through was COVID intervened, so the second half languished a bit. Some people moved in and out. Some people had forgotten about it. And when we got that going again, we actually ended up with a good number of people at the county commission chambers, a bunch of folks, neighbors, and support, and then just about as many with questions, right? That we just weren't able to get to, and because they were new. And the county commission thankfully took the time really to walk through that. It was probably over an hour hearing. And by the time we were done, just at that hearing, the folks who had concerns were good, right? They understood what this was. This wasn't a government-run HOA being placed on them. They really had a lot of flexibility with their properties. It's not as hard as it seems. The results are tremendous, and the most important piece is communication and education.
As it is in so many things, right?
As it is in a lot of things.
Yeah. Brenda, you want to jump in on this one?
It's worth it for us through the tourism lens, because these historic places are where all the stories come from. And good marketing is based on stories. So, it is worth it. It's very high value, but in the best possible sense, because places define themselves that way. What are our stories? What are we about? What's the character of a place? And it's always tied to the history preserved in buildings and the people who are going to talk about it. So, even though I'm not on the side of the how and how do you convince the city council to make it happen and all of that part of it, we certainly reap the benefits when it's done. And I really feel like our philosophy now as a destination marketing agency is to help communities do exactly that. Like if we have to go help our tourism partners convince their political leaders that preservation needs to happen, or that we're one of the stakeholders involved in seeing its value, we're absolutely ready to do that now.
That's great. And Courtney, so you come at it from maybe a different perspective, sometimes having to figure out how to do this. So how do you make the case that this is the right thing to do?
Well, I like what Russ said, that it's really not, it's a land use issue. But on top of that, and I think some subjectiveness goes along with land use as well in a lot of people. I think historic significance is really subjective. And I think that's what's hard to communicate to people. And that's why the act of, preserving something can sometimes be perceived as a difficult process. And, obviously not all historic resources can be saved, but if a building or site is important to a community, preservation should always be considered. I think significance aside, it's really important. It can't be understated the role of preservation in sustainability, livability, economic development, resilience, all of these things that municipalities like to say that these are their goals, and they are their goals, but sometimes they forget how important preservation is to those goals. And I just read this survey that was done by the AIA, and they had interviewed several architecture firms who said that when they're rehabbing a building, their most important goals were adaptive reuse and basic interior modernization, and the least important goals were energy performance and increased resilience. But the interesting thing is that adaptive reuse projects are already meeting those least important goals because preservation is inherently sustainable. And so I know that we've heard this, and we all know this, that you're involved in the built environment. It's been said for many years, but it may not be part of every discussion now. And I think that is key right now, is focusing on the benefits of preservation, the least subjective benefits of preservation.
That's so true. It is such a better for the environment to rehab and reuse an existing asset than it is to spend energy into building a new one. And too often, I think there's, at least in Las Vegas, there's been buildings that could have been preserved that unfortunately fallen by the wayside, either through vandalism or other things. But I think we keep fighting the good fight, and I hope that this small contribution we're making here on this fireside chat can help others think that way. So another thing that we hear, and I think we'd all agree that making places accessible to everyone is important. And I know we do that as a normal course of practice, but it's challenging sometimes in a historic structure, in a historic site. We have to balance, the guidelines and against accessibility guidelines. And, so what thoughts do you have on how best to balance these types of things? I'm going to start with you, Courtney, on this one, then go to Brenda, then Russ.
Sure. I believe it's important to consider accessibility in all historic preservation projects, even if it means sacrificing some historic fabric, because the greater goal of preservation is to make historic buildings and these experiences meaningful to visitors of all abilities. And in my experience, there has always been a happy medium, and that happy medium is best achieved, as much as possible with a very, diverse team, and especially with input from folks who, have to experience those types of modifications to those buildings. So that's kind of where I stand. I've never had an experience where a good design decision hasn't been made in order to solve that issue. It takes a village.
That's
I agree
for sure.
with that, Courtney. We're always thinking about travel mobility and accessibility and inclusivity, and a part of Travel Nevada's role is to educate people, to get them as prepared as possible to have the best experience. And so that is one of the things we consider about visitation of historic places, is what they can do to prepare for it if they have to. And then hopefully we're contributing enough to that local economy to help fund staff or assistance of any kind that they might need. So that's kind of our perspective on that. It's important.
100% agree. I mean, the attorney in me just says, you got to do it, right? You got to make it work. You got to comply. I would actually ask you, Craig, if you don't mind. I mean, as an architect ultimately, you're the one who's got to figure out a design to make accessibility work and preserving the history as much as possible. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, thanks. I've never been asked a question on a fireside chat, so it's good. One of the things that I always think of when we're doing projects like that, you don't want to diminish the experience. So, when you come to a place and there's a grand staircase or there's a grand place, you really don't want to design it in such a way that they have to go around the side and in the back, and they miss that whole experience. And so I think, we try to the best of our abilities to create the same thing for everybody, right? And whether that be in any kind of disability, but to try to have that experience be seamless, so that you go through it, I go through it, we get a similar experience. And it's not easy all the time to do that. I know we did some work out at Spring Mountain Ranch, and there was some challenges just with grades and places that you should or shouldn't walk, and how do we get people up to the blacksmith cabins and stuff like that. Those are not really trails. They're and so how do you do that? Well, we ended up, I know, putting in some asphalt kind of trails up there, and the asphalt maybe diminishes a little bit of that experience, but it also gets everybody there. And I think you try to do it as best as you can. That's all, maybe the only way I can answer that. So Jason, do we have any questions coming in from our audience?
Not yet, Craig. Some good comments along the way, and I think our panelists are doing a great job touching upon a lot of issues here. So, but I'll keep I'll put the fishing hook out there and see if we can get some.
All right, yeah, you guys, it's not often we get all three of these folks in the same room to answer your questions. So please throw something in the chat if you want to know about it. We're going to move on to a couple of specific questions that I have for people, and so Russ, can you explain a little bit more about, what does the Preservation Foundation do? And how can people, in the audience and in the public, how do they get involved in this?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. Well, first, it's Nevada Preservation Foundation is a nonprofit, right? We're a 501c3. And its mission is to preserve history in Nevada. We're a statewide organization. Our board has members in Southern Nevada and in Northern Nevada and in Reno Sparks, and we have a member, an architect in Elko as well. So as an organization, we do a couple things. One, we work on preservation projects, thanks in large part to the City of Las Vegas and the Centennial Commission and the Historic Preservation Commission. There's been a tremendous effort, as Courtney knows, and she's probably the reason why in the City of Las Vegas in particular. But we work on projects around the state, in Reno and Virginia City. There's a pending project in Pioche. So we do that kind of work, and we often bring in outside consultants as well who have expertise that we may not have to partner on projects. So if anyone has recommendations of other consultants out there, we're always looking for others to join and partner with, and to expand the capability to get this type of work done. And then we do a lot of advocacy and education, and a lot of that is around events like Home and History, walking tours that we do, working with local governments on particular tours for like the historic West Side. Those are really the two biggest components of what we do as an organization. And we're growing. We're interested in terms of involvement. There's obviously we have a tremendous base of volunteers, folks who really love preservation. Nevada Preservation wouldn't exist without the volunteers. I mean, that they are the core of this organization. They're the ones who really make everything happen. So there's tremendous opportunities to volunteer. If there's interest, you can go to our website, and there's links there to engage us in that regard. But we're growing our board. So if folks have an interest in really being more involved at a board level, we're actually developing an advisory council as well. There's a lot of folks who want to be involved, but don't have the time at the board level, but can really contribute. So we're doing that as well. And then, you can always write a check too. You can go online and donate. We're a nonprofit, so that's how we operate. Most of the project work we do is, that's reimbursable through a grant. So we don't use that to try to make money off of that. We try to, right, that's just trying to get the work done. So it's really our own events that we put on is how we raise money, as well as generous contributors around the state who participate.
It's really nice that, people will put their money towards that, and recognize the importance. I remember, 20 years ago when I was a planning commissioner and we created the historic neighborhoods of John S. Park, and then, the Scotch 80s and those areas, there wasn't a whole lot of knowledge about things, and there wasn't a whole lot of sentiment to restore things and keep things. But you look at it now, the people that move into those neighborhoods specifically to restore
Yes.
those homes, and they take such great pride in it. It's really wonderful to see the community get behind these types of things.
Well, and if I may add, I don't want to monopolize the time on this, but and we truly are looking for other partners, because there is so much demand. We're getting so many inquiries like we've had an inquiry from Councilwoman Olivia Diaz in the city of Las Vegas to begin to identify projects within the East Side in her district, in the Hispanic community, which really there hasn't been a lot of preservation done there, and that's, we don't want to lose that part of our history and culture. But beyond that, we've seen engagement from, and I don't want to be Vegas specific, but that's my, it's my knowledge base. But so LVCVA has engaged in a lot of the things we do because they recognize the tourism aspect. All the work that's been done over the years, begun by Tony Shea and others in downtown Las Vegas, has actually generated the gaming companies downtown have recognized and seen other folks who come to Las Vegas to be in that environment and experience it. And so you have that tourism element as well. There's just a tremendous amount of interest that's growing. I think it's just going to continue to grow. So there's real opportunities here, and I hope NPF can just be a part of that and help promote it.
That's great. So we do have a question from the audience. I'm going to go ahead and read this, and any one of you can jump in on this, but maybe a couple of you might want to answer it. But is there any state legislation in the works right now to affect historic preservation, whether good or bad? Maybe historic tax credits, other things. Do you guys know of anything that's kind of bubbling up?
Yeah, and if someone else wants to jump in, I don't want to. I've been talking too much already. But so our former executive director, Heidi Swank, tried to move a bill on historic tax credits. We didn't get that done. I've heard conversations about potentially doing that again, making another effort at that, as well as other programs where you can bid it. And I'm getting a little beyond my knowledge base here because I'm not an expert in preservation, but where organizations can leverage public monies and then use that to develop and preserve other properties. I didn't explain that well at all, but there are a few conversations, probably not enough, but there's a few of those going, to my knowledge.
Brenda, you're kind of close into that stuff too?
I am, and I was going to mention I was aware of Hillary Swank's work in the legislature to try to incentivize further state investment in preservation, and she spoke to me about it in terms of kind of tourism's role in advocating for that as well. And I agree. I hope another bill is drafted next session in regard to that. But I haven't heard yet. I don't know for sure.
Okay. Courtney, have you heard anything? You're on mute.
Excuse me, I have not.
think you're muted, Craig.
Now you're muted, Craig.
Well, that's perfect, right? So I'm gonna just really quick, Courtney, I'm gonna ask you this question. Because I know you're gonna have to leave and make a presentation soon to the Historic Preservation Commission in Boulder City. But what process do you go through when you come on a site to see, is that is that a heritage that can be preserved? Well, how do you kind of formulate your mindset around that?
We just say that George Washington slept here. I think this is an important mention because a lot of people don't really understand the work that goes into it. I did mention that it was subjective earlier, but we do a ton of research, and upfront, that's really the bulk of the work, is doing the research. I mean, first, you always assume something is significant if you're in my profession, but at first you have to establish the prehistoric context, within which the resource was developed. You research the property, the surrounding site, sometimes the city or town or country, whatever it is. And you do a deep dive into the resources builder, the architect, owner history, building permit history, oral history, images, aerials, maps, etc. Newspapers, ancestry.com, all the resources, brick and mortar and online resources. And then you evaluate it, use this information to evaluate the resource based on criteria for eligibility for listing in the local, state, or national register, whatever municipality is asking for the work or the evaluation, or where the funding is coming from. And another thing that's key is that the criteria that a lot of people use is established by the National Historic Preservation Act. So, we don't make it up. We actually get it from a federal agency, which is and the act also established the National Register of Historic Places, and they provide 4 basic criteria for establishing significance and eligibility. So it's either, is the resource associated with a significant person, a significant place, a significant architectural style or construction method, or does it have the potential to provide information about prehistory? And then we look at, does the resource retain integrity? Is it physically able to convey its significance still? And if after all of this, we can check all the boxes, we submit our findings to the state or the city or whatever to review. And so it is a long process. It requires a lot of work, and I'm actually glad you asked that question. So thank you.
Great. Jason, there must be a question.
Yeah, so we're getting a few now. So first question is, would you mind commenting on the few remaining examples of incredible roadside architecture in Vegas? And how can we save what we have left that's worth saving? Anyone take a stab at that one?
I'm going to defer to Russ for that one. About the savings.
Yeah, I presume by roadside architecture, the person means signage.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at this.
Yeah, I sigh a little, only because we recently lost some of the signage with the wedding chapel, and I'm blanking on the name of it. That was torn down so quickly, and some of our members actually went and tried to preserve some of the sign. I think it's in one of our members' backyards because he just try to save a piece, right? And how do we get in front of that? Not that we want to stop a property owner from developing a site. If they want to redevelop their site, that's their right. But at least have a conversation about, if you're going to demolish the building, are there things we can do to preserve a piece of it, move it somewhere, or and that's a really hard nut to crack in identify, because we can identify the stuff, but then it's, or the signs, for example, but having the conversations to capture them before anything happens is the tough part. And some of it's just time and so we're in an organization like NPF and its volunteers can help because it just takes conversations. So my answer to that in a long way is we just have to be more engaged as a community in preservation efforts, right? And make it more topical of mind and people be aware of, if they love seeing an old sign and it reminds them of, 40 years ago in their community, then we ought to be having a conversation about it with our public leaders and community leaders. And, maybe we ought to have those conversations in advance. To me, that's what it takes. I'm not sure if that answered the question well, but.
Yeah, I'd love to, if the person who asked the question, I'd love to hear some examples. If there's something top of mind, like nice to hear what that is. So if they're listening, please throw that in the chat. I don't know, Brenda, do you have anything to add to that specific question?
I would just say the same, get involved.
Yeah.
Get involved politically.
Yeah. Okay. We do have a few more questions, so we can keep going. Next one is, while the sustainable arguments for preserving are strong and valid, this person's more fascinated by the historical side, the actual story side. And Brenda, you mentioned there's a finite number of remaining historical sites. So how do you approach establishing criteria for newer sites and stories out there that are not as known, I guess? So.
Well, I guess history is relative, right? I mean, it's we're always in the middle of it. So I think that is part of our job, is to kind of distill that into a message that we can get behind, and both for residents and travelers. So I mentioned localism earlier, and that is really what we're centered on now, is what do the residents want in regard to our tourism focus? Like, what are the gaps? How can we help fill them? And so I guess maybe if those are considered newer sites, how do they match kind of the what else is in a community, so that it's of the right scale and character and texture, and hopefully those are things that create their own stories, right? They're designed well enough and thoughtfully enough that they're creating stories for the future.
Right. And even the newer stories become older stories for next generation, right? Like those, yeah. Courtney, maybe I'm gonna throw it back to you, but on the other side of this, going back to the sustainable argument, and talking about adaptive reuse, for instance, and what's the ways that we should be approaching when we have to add space or build right next to something that is historical in nature? I've seen anything from, we don't replicate what was done before, or do we? Or what's your philosophy on that?
Well, so the National Register also has kind of levels, or I should say types of approaches, treatment approaches, I'm sorry. And it goes anywhere from, you're going to preserve something and, you're setting it in stone, to, you're restoring something to exactly a certain period of time, or you're going to reconstruct a portion of it, which is, something that is key to interpreting that resource, right? So it happens a lot in districts, like if you have a bunch of buildings, like a ranch, for example, and a building gets burned down, and you might consider reconstructing that building because that's the building that's going to complete the story for the ranch. And there's rehabilitation, which is what most projects fall into, that category. when you're rehabilitating and you have to add something to it, it's really important that you're not creating a false sense of history, which is the language that they use. And it's very specific because, you know, you want to make it compatible material, compatible massing, maybe compatible, you know, facade rhythms or other kind of fenestration, but it shouldn't mirror or, you know, replicate the historic building, you know, unless, like I said, you're reconstructing something that was lost. So you just don't want to create that false sense of history. You want to walk up to the building and know that this is new, but it was necessary. Buildings grow, we grow, right? So
Right.
for example, before I have to sign out, John S. Park neighborhood, when we were doing that study in the early aughts, there were a ton of additions, right? And the additions were because the homes were built during World War II and right after World War II. And so of course everyone's having babies and they all need more room. So those additions were built like in the late 40s, early 50s, many of them. And so we considered those significant. So as we're doing our survey of the district and we're looking at contributing and non-contributing structures, we're not discounting those with those additions simply because, and even garage infills, things that impacted the facade, because it was important that it happened. So that's, I guess, I hope I answered that question.
I think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
if you need clarification, I have a couple more minutes.
I know, we know where to go.
Okay.
And Courtney, I know you have to go. So if you need to go ahead and drop off, but we really enjoyed having you.
Yeah, this was so much fun. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Courtney.
All right.
Nice meeting you all.
Nice meeting you.
Bye.
Take care. Craig, if I'm just gonna follow up on one more question, and then a follow-up to a previous question. So I don't know if it changes our answer, but on the roadside question, it was referring to signage, but also architecture of, you know, the old motels and gas stations around Vegas. I'm sure like Fremont Street has a lot of great examples of this. Another question regarding many schools of architecture offer historic preservation programs. Do you think the idea of preservation promotion in Nevada would be well served if places like UNLV offered a similar degree? And I guess this calls for, is there a gap in professional architectural historians such as Courtney? Do we, you know, is that something to focus that we need to start looking at?
I think probably. I kind of travel in these circles, and I don't know too many.
Yeah.
Yeah, and from a Nevada Preservation Foundation perspective, a lot of times there's grants where we need to have an architectural historian as part of the project, right? And sometimes finding those folks is tough, right?
Right.
So
sounds like a great opportunity for people who may be of interest in preservation. So I think that's it with the. Oh, we have a couple more. 1 second. Nope, I think that's it for the questions from the audience, Craig.
Right. Well, I do have a question directly for Brenda, and then maybe we can close it out on this. Brenda, how do cultural sites fit into our state's overall tourism plan?
They do. As I said, you know, outside of outdoor recreation, this is really it. This is what we're going to put forward as why you want to come to Nevada. That's what you want to experience is our heritage. And I touch on so many aspects of it as the director of this department. Our state museums are preserving Nevada's heritage in regard to archives and artifacts. The Arts Council is, you know, fostering artist communities that in many ways kind of express the heritage in their community through art. And of course, our tribal nations contribute to our heritage in such a rich way. So, you know, we're very much focused on making it a part of our plan. Yeah, as I mentioned it a couple of times, but I think it's such a part of our forward thinking in regard to this. Our destination development program will help communities do exactly that. Prioritize their heritage, and how can visitation help create it, build it, foster it, preserve it. We're gonna build a team of state and federal guides that can help local stakeholders think about that, and build a long-range plan to not only preserve what they have, but I mean, I like the idea that anything new is your future history, and it, you know, you need to get it right. You need to do it in a thoughtful way.
Create those great stories. I love that. You know,
Yeah, that building sitting behind Jason is a good example.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Can't imagine if we didn't have that downtown.
No kidding. And the stories that are told out of there are amazing.
Amazing stories.
Yeah.
I know.
To Brenda's point.
Yeah, 25 years ago or so, I went to Boston for the first time, and did the Freedom Walk, and I always thought, you know, our history, you know, that's the history of our country, and you know, there's a lot of things we all know, right? But there's so much significant history in Nevada that a lot of people don't know. And you know, my hope would be is that we keep pushing it forward, and you know, someday people will fly here to do you know, the Nevada Walk or whatever that might be. And and I know they do, but I would like to see them come in droves to come see the wonderful and learn the wonderful stories we have that are so different than anywhere else.
I know our recent research has really pointed out that after the pandemic, people are making the choice in terms of destinations. They're looking for a transformative experience, right? They want an escape from their current lifestyle and to experience a new one. So they're looking for those authentic things they can experience outside of their own norms. And I think Nevada has a lot of that to offer. Of course, we also consider the international traveler, and they kind of innately have an abiding interest in our Western culture. And we have so much of that that's still here. I always like to say, you know, we have more ghost towns than living towns in Nevada. But I think it's a trending fact that people are more and more appreciative of culture, and the cultural traveler is one of the audiences that we speak to a lot.
Thank you. I think, Craig, maybe we should close us off.
Yeah, I think I don't want to keep you guys longer than you did. Thank you so much for showing up today and bringing your knowledge and your passion for something that really is important to our communities. And we appreciate the hard work you guys put in, and I look forward to seeing you around at another great project that we all helped preserve.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.
All right.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Goodbye.